South Pacific, November 1943. Dawn broke over the Solomon Islands in shades of copper and gold, illuminating the corrugated metal roofs of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The air vibrated with the low rumble of engines as 12 F-4U Corsairs from Marine Fighting Squadron VMF-214 prepared for takeoff. The temperature had already climbed to 85 degrees, and humidity clung to the skin like a second uniform. Lieutenant Commander James Holloway stood beside his Corsair, running his hand along the sleek blue fuselage. 24 years old, with 3 confirmed kills to his name, Holloway had the weathered look of a man who'd seen too much sky and too little sleep. His squadron had been on Guadalcanal for 63 days, 63 days of combat sorties, mechanical failures, and the relentless drone of Japanese bombers at night. "Radio check, Corsair 6, crackled the voice in his headset. Holloway adjusted the dial, hearing only intermittent static and fragments of words. "Corsair 6, radio check. Do you copy?" The tower's voice dissolved into a sea of electronic interference. Holloway tapped his headset in frustration and signaled to his crew chief, who climbed up to examine the communications equipment. This marked the 3rd radio failure in a week. As he waited, Holloway watched the squadron's commanding officer, Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, striding across the airfield, his gait unmistakable even from a distance. "Same problem?" Boyington asked, shielding his eyes against the rising sun. Holloway nodded. "SCR 522 is acting up again. Moisture in the circuits, I think." "That makes 6 aircraft with radio problems," Boyington said, his expression grim. "Bondi Towers reporting Japanese bombers headed for the Russell Islands with fighter escort. Estimated time to target, 40 minutes. The crew chief descended from the cockpit with a shake of his head. "No fix, sir. Moisture's corroded the contacts. Need replacement parts we don't have." Boyington checked his watch, calculating distances and fuel consumption in his head. "Can you fly without it?" "Affirmative, sir." "Then you'll fly without it. Take position on my wing. We'll use hand signals." Across the tarmac, other pilots were receiving similar news. Half the squadron would fly without functioning communication equipment. The consequences of such a disadvantage against a well-coordinated Japanese fighter group were left unspoken between them. 10 minutes later, 12 Corsairs thundered down Henderson Field's main runway, lifting into the morning air one after another. They formed up at 3,000 feet, the distinctive inverted gull wings of the Corsairs gleaming in the sunlight. Holloway took position on Boyington's right wing, close enough to see his commanding officer's face. Boyington pointed west, then held up 5 fingers, 5,000 feet. The squadron climbed in formation. They had barely reached their assigned altitude when Holloway spotted them, 27 dots approaching from the northwest. Mitsubishi A6M-0s, escorting a formation of Betty bombers. The Japanese had arrived early, catching the American squadron still in its climb. Boyington's hand chopped downward in the signal to attack. The squadron broke formation, diving toward the approaching enemy. Without radios to coordinate their movements, half the American pilots would be flying deaf into one of the most dangerous engagements of their careers. No one could have predicted that this limitation would become their greatest advantage. The Pacific Theater in late 1943 represented a turning point in the aerial war against Japan. American aircraft production had finally reached its stride, delivering superior machines like the F-4U Corsair to frontline squadrons. With a top speed of 417 miles per hour and 650 caliber machine guns, the Corsair outclassed the nimble but lightly armored Japanese Zero in almost every category except maneuverability. Yet despite this technological edge, American fighter units in the Pacific faced a persistent and deadly problem: communication failure. The SCR 522 radio, standard equipment in all Allied fighters, had been designed for the dry, moderate climate of European operations. In the tropical humidity of the South Pacific, These radios failed at an alarming rate. Marine Fighting Squadron VMF 214, nicknamed the Black Sheep, suffered this limitation more acutely than most. Operating from forward airfields on Guadalcanal and Vella La Vella, their maintenance facilities consisted of little more than open-air repair tents and salvaged equipment. Replacement parts arrived irregularly, if at all. By October 1943, radio failures had contributed to the loss of 7 pilots in the squadron. The pattern repeated with devastating predictability. A flight of Corsairs would engage Japanese aircraft, communications would fragment or fail completely, and coordination would collapse. Pilots unable to warn each other of approaching enemies became isolated targets. The Japanese, operating with reliable voice communications, would isolate and overwhelm individual American aircraft. During one particularly costly mission over Bougainville on October 17th, 3 Corsairs from VMF 214 were shot down when their radios failed mid-engagement. Lieutenant Wilson survived, but spent 4 days in a life raft before rescue. Lieutenants Grady and Perkins were never found. Major Boyington, a former Flying Tiger with experience operating under austere conditions in China, recognized the fatal pattern. During the squadron's after-action review in a sweltering tent at Vella La Vella, he studied the maintenance reports with increasing concern. 17 radio failures in the past 2 weeks, he announced to his gathered pilots. That's more than half our operational aircraft affected. Lieutenant Commander Holloway, whose engineering background at the Naval Academy had given him insight into the technical aspects of their predicament, spoke up. "Sir, the problem is fundamental. The SCR-522's vacuum tubes can't handle this humidity. The phenolic insulation absorbs moisture, resistors corrode, and connections fail. Even when they work initially, vibration and G-forces during combat cause failures." "What are our options?" Boyington asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Supply says replacement parts are at least 3 weeks out," replied the squadron's maintenance officer, "and even those won't solve the underlying design problem." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. 3 more weeks of uncoordinated combat would likely cost the squadron more pilots, men they couldn't afford to lose. Lieutenant Archer Davidson, a soft-spoken Texan with 4 confirmed kills, cleared his throat. "Sir, I flew with the Royal Air Force before America entered the war. During the Battle of Britain, some Hurricane squadrons developed visual signals for use when radio silence was necessary. Not just the basic signals we all know, they had a whole system." Boyington's eyes narrowed with interest. "How effective was it?" "Against the Luftwaffe, limited success. Germans flew tight formations, maintained strict discipline." Davidson paused. "But the Japanese fly differently. They're more individualistic in combat. They separate. They focus on single targets." The conversation continued well into the night, with pilots debating the merits of various alternatives. Some suggested rotating the few functioning radios among the most experienced pilots. Others proposed limiting operations to only aircraft with working communications. As the meeting dispersed, Holloway remained behind, studying the squadron's combat reports from the past 3 months. A pattern emerged that contradicted conventional wisdom. The pilots who had achieved the most kills were often those who had operated with failed radios. Forced to rely on their own judgment rather than waiting for instructions, they had engaged targets of opportunity with greater autonomy. The realization formed slowly in his mind. Perhaps their fatal flaw concealed an unexpected advantage. The solution came to Holloway at 0300 hours, while he lay on his cot listening to the distant rumble of Japanese bombers over Iron Bottom Sound. The oppressive heat made sleep impossible, and his mind kept returning to the problem of the radios. What if, instead of struggling to fix them, they eliminated them entirely? At first light, he sought out Boyington, finding him already awake and reviewing reconnaissance photographs outside the operations tent. Without preamble, Holloway laid out his radical proposal. "Sir, I think we should remove the radios. All of them. Every aircraft." Boyington looked up from the photographs, his expression unreadable. "Explain." "They're dead weight, sir. 12 pounds of useless equipment that's more likely to fail than function. But more importantly, they're changing how we fight, and not for the better." Holloway spread out his notes on the makeshift table. "I've analyzed our combat reports. When our radios work, we operate as a traditional squadron. We wait for orders, we call out targets, we maintain formation discipline, but when they fail, something changes. We become more aggressive, more opportunistic." Boyington studied the combat statistics with growing interest. "You're saying our success rate actually improves when communications fail?" "Yes, sir. Without radio contact, our pilots are forced to make independent decisions. They engage targets without waiting for confirmation. They follow their instincts." Holloway tapped the paper emphatically. "Our highest-scoring engagements have been the ones where most of the squadron had radio failures." Boyington was silent for a long moment, weighing the implications. "The brass will never approve this. Flying without radios violates every tactical doctrine in the book." "Then we don't tell them," Holloway said quietly. "We report the radios as non-functional, which is already true for most of them. We develop our own system of visual signals, as Davidson suggested. But we take it further. We design an entirely new way of fighting." The risk was enormous. Operating without radios meant no coordination with friendly forces, no weather updates, no emergency communications. If a pilot went down over water, he couldn't transmit his position. If the squadron encountered unexpected enemy formations, they couldn't call for reinforcements. Every mission would become, essentially, a silent journey into combat. Yet the potential advantages were equally significant. Without the weight of the radio equipment, each Corsair would gain a slight edge in speed and maneuverability. More importantly, without the false security of radio contact, each pilot would need to develop greater situational awareness and independence. After 2 days of intense debate among the squadron's senior pilots, Boyington made his decision. The operation would proceed in phases. First, they would develop an expanded system of visual signals, not just the basic combat signals taught in flight school, but a comprehensive language of hand gestures, aircraft movements, and light signals. Second, they would modify their tactical approach. Instead of the standard 4 aircraft divisions used by most American squadrons, VMF 214 would fly in pairs, each consisting of an experienced pilot and a newer one. These pairs would operate semi-autonomously within the larger formation, making tactical decisions without waiting for orders. Finally, they would remove the radios, not all at once, which would attract unwanted attention from headquarters, but gradually, reporting each removal as a maintenance necessity. The work began in secret. Lieutenant Davidson, drawing on his RAF experience, developed a catalogue of over 30 distinct hand signals. Lieutenant Commander Holloway, with his engineering background, supervised the careful removal of the radio equipment from the first 4 aircraft, ensuring that the Corsair's electrical systems remained functional without the communications gear. On the night of November 7, 1943, Boyington gathered the squadron for a final briefing before implementing their unorthodox strategy. The risks were made clear to every pilot. They would be deliberately violating combat protocols. If the experiment failed, court-martials would likely follow. "This isn't just about working around failed equipment," Boyington told them. "This is about becoming a different kind of fighting unit. Without radios, we'll need to think differently, fight differently. Each of you will need to become your own squadron commander up there." The room was silent as the pilots contemplated what they were about to undertake. Some looked uncertain, others, particularly those who had already experienced the freedom of fighting without communications constraints, appeared eager to begin. "We fly our first silent mission tomorrow at 600, Boyington concluded. Iron Bottom Sound, Japanese shipping convoy with fighter escort. As the briefing ended, Holloway approached Davidson with a final concern. What if we're wrong about this? What if radio communication is more valuable than we've calculated? Davidson's response was simple. Then we'll be remembered as the squadron that made the most foolish mistake of the Pacific War. Neither man could have anticipated that they were about to revolutionize fighter combat in the Pacific Theater. November 8th, 1943. 0600 hours. The first rays of dawn illuminated the 12 Corsairs of VMF 214 as they lifted off from Henderson Field. Every aircraft in the squadron now flew without radio equipment, a fact carefully concealed from higher command through falsified maintenance reports. In their place, each cockpit contained a waterproofed card with Davidson's visual signals, though most pilots had already committed them to memory. The mission: intercept and engage Japanese vessels attempting to reinforce their positions on Bougainville. Intelligence reported a convoy of 3 transport ships with destroyer escort, protected by a covering force of Zeros from the elite 204th Air Group. At 6,000 feet, the squadron formed into their new configuration. 6 pairs spread across a mile-wide front, each pair maintaining visual contact but operating with tactical independence. Major Boyington and Lieutenant Davidson led the formation, with Holloway and his wingman, Ensign Robert Miller, on their right flank. 43 minutes into the flight, Davidson spotted them first, a formation of 16 Zeros flying protection pattern at 8,000 feet, with the naval convoy visible as tiny rectangles on the sea below. He signaled to Boyington, "Enemy aircraft, 16 count draw 2 o'clock high." Boyington responded with the new attack signal they had developed, a rolling motion of his aircraft followed by a sharp banking turn toward the enemy. This wasn't just a command to engage, it conveyed specific tactical information. The rolling motion indicated that each pair should attack independently, choosing their own targets rather than concentrating on a single section of the enemy formation. The squadron split apart, each pair of Corsairs moving with coordinated precision toward different segments of the Japanese formation. Without radio calls announcing their approach, the Americans achieved complete tactical surprise. Holloway and Miller dove toward 2 Zeros patrolling the eastern edge of the formation. The Japanese pilots spotted them late, attempting to turn into the attack but finding themselves caught in a vulnerable position. Holloway's first burst of .50 caliber fire struck the leading Zero's engine cowling, sending fragments of metal spinning away from the aircraft. The Japanese pilot rolled inverted and dove toward the sea, trailing smoke. Across the engagement area, similar scenes unfolded. Without radio chatter to warn of their approaches, the Corsair pairs struck from multiple directions simultaneously. The Japanese formation, accustomed to detecting American attacks through intercepted radio transmissions, found themselves reacting to threats from all quarters. 3 minutes into the engagement, the tactical situation had transformed. 4 Zeros were already descending in flames or trailing smoke. The remaining Japanese aircraft had broken their formation, splitting into individual defensive fights, exactly the scenario VMF 214 had trained for. Holloway and Miller separated slightly, maneuvering to trap a Zero between them. The Japanese pilot, focusing on evading Holloway's pursuit, failed to notice Miller approaching from his blind spot. Miller's 6 machine guns spoke in unison, walking tracers across the Zero's wing route and into its cockpit. The Japanese aircraft rolled once, then plummeted toward the Pacific. Without radios, the American pilots relied entirely on visual awareness. Each continually scanned the sky around them, watching not only for enemies, but also for the signals of their squadron mates. When Boyington executed a quick wing rock followed by a diving turn, the message was clear to all: attack the ships below. 6 Corsairs peeled away from the aerial engagement, diving toward the Japanese convoy. Their approach, unannounced by radio communications, caught the ship's anti-aircraft gunners unprepared. The corsairs streaked across the convoy at masthead height, machine guns hammering the bridges and gun positions of the transport vessels. Lieutenant Davidson led a second pass, this time targeting the destroyer escort. His wingman, Lieutenant Crawford, suffered a direct hit from anti-aircraft fire that tore through his right wing. Crawford's corsair shuddered violently, trailing fuel, but remained airborne. Using the practiced signal for aircraft damage, a deliberate rocking of his wings, followed by a thumbs-down gesture, Crawford communicated his situation to Davidson. Davidson responded with a series of hand signals, directing his wounded wingman to break off and return to base, while simultaneously alerting nearby corsair pairs to the situation. 2 aircraft smoothly moved to provide cover for Crawford's withdrawal, all without a single word transmitted. The engagement lasted 17 minutes from first contact to the American withdrawal. The results were unprecedented. 11 Japanese aircraft confirmed destroyed, 2 transport ships heavily damaged and burning, with only 1 corsair seriously damaged and none lost. Not since the early days of the Guadalcanal campaign had a single squadron achieved such a lopsided victory. As they reformed for the flight back to Henderson Field, Boyington signaled his approval with a thumbs-up gesture that every pilot could see. Their radical experiment, fighting without the safety net of radio communication, had yielded results that exceeded even their most optimistic projections. But the true test would come in the days ahead, as they refined their silent fighting techniques and encountered Japanese forces who would inevitably adapt to this new American tactic. Word of VMF 214's extraordinary success spread quickly through the South Pacific Command structure, though the true nature of their tactical innovation remained concealed. Official reports attributed their improved performance to enhanced visual coordination techniques and aggressive pair-based tactics, carefully omitting any mention of the deliberately disabled radio equipment. Over the next 4 weeks, the squadron's combat record spoke for itself. By mid-December 1943, VMF 214 had achieved a 14-to-1 kill ratio, the highest of any American fighter unit in the Pacific theater. They destroyed 77 Japanese aircraft while losing only 5 of their own pilots, a success rate that drew attention from the highest levels of command. The Japanese, meanwhile, struggled to adapt to this new American fighting style. Having become reliant on intercepting American radio transmissions for early warning and tactical intelligence, they now faced an opponent who appeared without announcement and attacked from unexpected vectors. Japanese after-action reports from this period revealed increasing frustration and confusion about the Americans' new silent combat technique. On December 23rd, Rear Admiral Arthur Radford, Deputy Commander of South Pacific Forces, visited Henderson Field specifically to observe VMF 214's operations. During the inspection, Lieutenant Commander Holloway experienced a moment of dread when Radford paused at his corsair, noting the absent radio equipment. "Maintenance issues, I presume?" Radford asked, his expression neutral. "Yes, sir," Holloway replied. "Humidity damage to the circuit boards." Radford studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "Curious how such problems seem concentrated in your squadron, Commander." The Admiral moved on without further comment, but the message was clear. Higher command suspected what they were doing. 3 days later, Major Boyington was summoned to South Pacific headquarters on Noumea. He returned with unexpected news. Instead of the reprimand or court-martial the squadron had feared, they had received unofficial approval to continue their unorthodox tactics. Admiral William Halsey himself had apparently remarked that he didn't give a damn if they flew with carrier pigeons, as long as they kept killing Japanese. More surprisingly, Boyington brought back a delivery of new equipment: lightweight signal flares, improved aircraft recognition lights, and specially modified gun sights, all designed to enhance visual communication between aircraft. Naval intelligence had recognized the strategic value of a squadron that couldn't be tracked or anticipated through radio intercepts. By January 1944, the Silent Combat Protocol, developed by VMF 214, had been formalized into a tactical manual distributed to other Marine fighter squadrons throughout the Pacific. While few units adopted the complete radio-free approach, many incorporated elements of the visual signaling system and pair-based tactics that had proven so effective. The Japanese response evolved as well. By early 1944, Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service units began implementing radio silence protocols of their own, attempting to counter the Americans at their own game. The resulting engagements became increasingly complex visual chess matches, with both sides attempting to predict and counter the other's movements without electronic communication. For VMF 214, the culmination of their tactical innovation came during the massive carrier battles of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the engagement later known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, operating from the USS Essex as temporary carrier-based support. The squadron destroyed 27 Japanese aircraft in a single day without losing a pilot. In the official after-action report, Admiral Mark Mitcher noted, VMF 214's ability to coordinate complex combat maneuvers without radio communication provided a decisive tactical advantage. Enemy forces, unable to anticipate their movements through signal intelligence, were consistently outmaneuvered and overwhelmed. The human cost of this innovation was not insignificant. While combat losses decreased dramatically, the squadron experienced the loss of Lieutenant Robert Anderson on December 17, 1943, when his aircraft suffered engine failure 60 miles from Vella La Vella. Without radio equipment to signal his position, search aircraft failed to locate him before his life raft drifted beyond the search perimeter. His body was never recovered, yet the tactical advantages proved overwhelming. By removing their radios, VMF 214 had not merely worked around a technical limitation, they had fundamentally altered the nature of air combat in the Pacific. They transformed a disadvantage into a revolutionary approach that influenced fighter tactics for the remainder of the war. In February 1944, when replacement SCR-522 radios finally arrived in sufficient numbers to equip the entire squadron, Major Boyington made a surprising decision. The equipment would remain in storage. VMF 214 would continue to fly silent. The squadron's innovation never appeared in official tactical manuals of the period. The Navy and Marine Corps, concerned about the precedent of sanctioning deliberate equipment modifications, maintained the fiction that VMF 214's success resulted from superior pilot training rather than tactical improvisation. Only in classified after-action reports was the truth acknowledged. The last entry in VMF 214's squadron log for 1943, dated December 31st, contains this understated assessment. Squadron tactical efficiency has improved 72% following implementation of visual coordination protocols and elimination of unreliable communications equipment. Recommend continuation of current operational parameters indefinitely. In the history of aerial warfare, few units achieved such dramatic results from such a counterintuitive approach. By eliminating what was considered essential equipment, they discovered a tactical edge that transformed them from an average fighter squadron into one of the most lethal units in the Pacific War. Naval Aviation Tactical Bulletin, 1946. The experience of certain Pacific Theater fighter units suggests that over-reliance on radio communication may create exploitable vulnerabilities. While modern electronic systems remain essential to coordinated operations, all naval aviators should be proficient in alternative signaling methods and autonomous tactical decision-making.